Hello, my Frontend friends. The subject of today's video is the focus of a lot of memes talking about how hard it can be to do, but with modern CSS, we've reached the point where we actually have maybe too many ways to center a div. But in going through them the other day for something else I was working on, I realized that we can actually learn a lot about CSS and the different intricacies of how it works in different contexts and some of the different things that we can do with it by exploring all the different ways that we can actually center a div today. So that's what we're going to be doing today, breaking down all the different ways to center something, but learning a lot of interesting things along the way about just how CSS works. And also, I think it's a really good way to build up some critical thinking skills too, because, well, obviously having a whole bunch of different ways to center a div is just, well, why do we have so many different ways to do it? But it's because in different situations and different contexts that come up, you'll want to use some of these different strategies. And it's usually the situation that you're in is going to dictate which one is the best one to use. We're going to talk about that. And that just comes into layout and everything else and the thinking about it, because there's always more than one way to do something. And with CSS and with everything that we're doing. So by breaking down this, I think it's a good way to talk a little bit along the way also on how just to think about things in general and break things down and understand how they're working. So the very first one that I want to look at is the old school way of doing it. And actually, before we even get into that, I do want to mention that I have, there is some other CSS going down here for just the styling of this, but I am setting a height on my divs, the outer div, right? So I have a width of 500 with an aspect ratio of 1. So of course I'm centering this within a defined space. You always, if you want to center vertically, it could be with Flexbox or other things, but there has to be a smaller element within something that's taller. So just get that out of the way so we don't worry about that. So the really old school way of doing things was on the parent doing a position of relative, and then on the child coming in with a position of absolute. And then on here, what we do is a top of 50% and then a left of 50%. And while this one's kind of annoying to do, it is a good one in understanding just how positioning works within CSS, because, and let's just move this out of the way so we're just focused on sort of the code that matters. But we have this top of 50% here and a left of 50. We're positioning it based on the top left corner of this element. And so the top is always based on the top, and the left is always based on where is the left going. And it's going to the 50% mark of the parent over here. So we've moved it over 50%, and then the top is 50% down here. So it's obviously not quite centered yet. The top left corner is perfectly centered. And it's just a good sort of reminder, I guess, on when we're using percentages for top, left, right, bottom. When we do that, it's always the percent of the parent, but that top is at the 50%, and we're not putting the element at 50% of the way there. And so then what we would always have to do is come in with a transform and then do a translate of negative 50%, negative 50%. And then it goes right in the middle. Because while these are looking at the 50% of the parent, on transforms, if we use percentages, it's looking at the element itself that transform is on. So we're moving it over 50% of itself and then up 50% of its own size. So then because the corner was the part that was right in the middle, then when we move it halfway over and halfway up, we're in exactly the middle of the parent. This is something that I had a tutor recently mention on Blue Sky, and I want to bring it up because the example that she had with this, the inner box had a width and a height of 100% to match the size of the outer box. And so all of this was completely useless. It didn't have to be there. So like if you need to center something, first of all, we're going to look at better ways of doing it for the most part than this, but only use this if you really need to. Don't just slap it in there because it's in the middle. If it's the same size as the parent, then it's the same size as the parent. So yeah, there we go. It's in the middle. We're happy. That's good. And I would only use this if I really needed to use a position absolute on something. It could be a pseudo element and I need it to go exactly here, or maybe there's other content that's in there and I'm some sort of decoration or some specific reason that I need to do that. Then using position absolute, we pull it out of the flow and we can get it there. So for decorative stuff and other things, we're pulling it out of the flow isn't a big issue. This works perfectly fine. There is a slightly more modern way that we could do this, which is just taking off the transform as well. Just because we do have translate as its own property, and if we do it as its own property, we don't put any comma separation between them. And I always forget, so we're going to do a quick one here. The 20% is the left and the right. So this is my x-axis, and then this one here is my y-axis. And it works exactly the same way that we had before. It just saves us a few characters, because now the transform values are all their own properties that we can use like this. And depends what we're doing, but in a situation like this, I think it makes sense just to simplify things a little bit like that. This, even though I don't think we need to bother with anymore, if I was going to go down this route, and again, I want to go over these just to understand CSS better and these different things. So understanding how translates work versus top, left, bottom, and right is awesome. So that's why I wanted to look at this one. The next one is using an inset. And this one's a lot more interesting to me, is actually an inset of 0. And an inset of 0 is a top, bottom, left, and right of 0. So inset's the shorthand for all 4 of those properties. You'll notice that my box is still small. That's because I do have a defined width on there. This is important. If you're going to do this trick, you need to have some sort of width and height. The 150 here works for me because we're in demo land, but let's just say we did have some content in here. Hello world. Often what you'll do is, obviously, instead of an aspect ratio on here, you'd probably have something that's a width of, say, fit content and a height of fit content or something like that. So then you have a defined width and height that fit your content, which fit content means it'll be the size of the content, but if you reduce the amount of space further, the text can still wrap. It won't cause any overflows. So this is a common setup for there. So you have a defined width and height, but with the inset of 0 on there. And what that means with the inset of 0 on here is we can come in with a margin of auto. And the margin of auto means that we have all that extra space that's around there that we can move in, and it centers it right in the middle. Now, I don't have a hello world normally, so we'll take that back off so we can go back to just having my little dot now that's in the middle. And we'll come back with an aspect ratio of 1 and a width of 150 pixels here, just so you can see we're right in the middle. But yeah, position absolute, inset 0, so we're saying it has all the space to live, but then with a defined size on it, margin auto, and then the margin auto on the left and the right, as well as the top and the bottom, just centers it right in the middle. And that works out really well. This is probably what I would choose now if I was doing a position absolute and had to center something rather than the transforms translates, just because it's a lot easier to do. And I actually figured this out, or learned about this, by inspecting elements and for the modal pop-ups that we have now, because this is with the fit content is actually the default setup they have for those to open it and have it fixed. They're using position fixed instead of absolute, but yeah, I was like, oh, that's neat, and I was happy to learn that. And now, while position absolute, as I said, can work, this is good if you need to take something out of the flow for whatever reason. This could even be good again as a pseudo element because you need like something in the back. So you do the pseudo element that has it, the z index -1 or something to pull it behind, and then it's a decorative element that's, within, you have other text and other things on top. A lot of the time though, I don't need to do that. So I'm going to use either a position flex or a display of flex or a display of grid. So with display flex, by default things stretch, and by default the justified content is align start. But we can come in with the justify content of center, so that will put it in the middle left to right, and then the align items of center, and that will center it this way as well. This became sort of the new de facto way of doing it. Just once we were able, this is sort of the first way that we could actually center something, right? Which was really nice. Without position absolute, I should say. And so it was really nice to get this. This one, I think, is one a lot of people are familiar with. So we're just centering along both axes. We can do the exact same thing with grid. So let's just comment these off so we can see that when we do that, it goes back to where it was, but I can say this is a display grid instead. There's obviously a difference with display grid versus flex because we're not stretching to fit by default, but we still have the same options here for our justify content and align items of center, and then it goes bang right in the middle there. Now, as long as you're only dealing with one element, we can do it like this. But interestingly enough, with grid, you can also do a justify items, which is something that doesn't exist when we're in Flexbox, right? So let's just turn that off so we can see that it flies back to the side, and then we have a justify items of center, and it goes in the middle. There's a reason we don't have justify items within Flexbox is because of the way the grid works, and it makes sense within the grid context. So if we take a look here at this and I turn on my grid, the grid cell is this one really big cell. And so let's turn off this items here and do it back with justified content. And what the justified content is doing is it's actually centering the grid itself. The grid is matching the size of the content inside of it. And then you can see where the grid is. It's right in the middle. So we're centering the grid effectively. Whereas if we use the justify items instead, what that's doing is it's centering the items within the cells that they're inside of. So there is a difference between the two of them, but if you only have one item, it works identically and do the exact same thing. Or not so much because it does the same thing, but because we're using items for both of them, we can also turn these both off. And there is a shorthand that we can use, which is place items of center, which is the shorthand for both justify and align items. So like that, the shortest, nicest way to center something right now, I think. Display grid, place item center, and it's right in the middle. Another thing that we can do is I can turn that off, and we can also say place self of center, and that will also work and place it in the middle. So whether you want to select the child or the parent, either one of those is completely fine. This is working in the exact same way as the place items of center, because we only have one element, right? If we had multiple different elements, then things change a little bit. But because we have one element, here we're saying that it's an align self and a justify self. So it's working the same way that the items would work here, where we have a big cell and we're just positioning it in the middle of its own cell. So that works out really well right there. Now I am going to turn this one off. And there is one thing, as I mentioned, up until now, we've only been talking about one element. I'm going to come in here with a second element now. So we're just going to paste this inner box here. And on the second inner box, let's come in. We're going to say inner box nth child 2. And we're just going to change the color of it. Background is going to be, let's go in with a orange red, because it's going to be very different. And border color can be a orange, just so it sort of matches in style. And for fun, let's also throw a rotate of like 20 degrees on there or something. And you'll see why we're going to rotate it in a minute. We're going to do a little rotation on there. So one thing that can be kind of useful for grid sometimes is there's a really easy way to stack content. And so what we can do if we're stacking content is actually do a grid template areas of stack. And in doing that, and you can do this with your line numbers instead of using a template area. It's completely up to you. But then what we're going to do is come here and just select all the different, all the direct children. And I like doing it with grid area just because I find it easier. But again, the line numbers are completely fine. And I'm just going to write stack right here. So they all go into the same area and they're stacked on top of each other. So like that. And then the nice thing, once again, place items of center and it all goes in the middle. So a nice little bonus with grid is it's easier to do this if you need multiple things centered on top of each other. I find it a little bit easier to do it with grid than with other options, and we don't need absolute positioning. And this technically could work with Flexbox, but overlapping content with Flexbox is harder. So if I throw a Z index on the inner box, let's do the inner nth child 2. Let's just make this one my nth child 1. And then we could say a Z index here of a 2. A 1 would probably even work, and it pulls it forward. So you can control the order very easily of centering a whole bunch of stacked content. So a nice little fun bonus there of centering stuff and learning a bit more about grid. Now I'm going to keep both elements here for now. We can get rid of this Z index because we won't need it. And I'm going to get rid of this grid area of stack. I'm going to get rid of the stack that's here because I want to keep both elements existing for a second. Because you'll notice if we get rid of this place items of center, they're going to be on the left side like you'd expect them to be. But the grid itself is actually stretching to fill the entire space. So let's go take a look here. Once again, at the grid, I'm going to turn on my grid inspector. And you can see the grid is the entire thing, and the grid is taking up the entire width of the parent. And then because the elements have defined sizes on them, they're just living at the top of their cells. But their cells are split like 50% on both of those. If I do the place items of center, this is centering them within their cells themselves. So this is centered horizontally within the cell, horizontally is this way, sorry, horizontally this way within that cell, and then vertically within the cell this way. Same thing over here. We can turn off that rotation now on this one. There is another option, which is doing content here instead. And like before, now we're taking that whole grid and we're centering the entire grid based on the size of the children that are in there. So the grid shrinks down to the size of the children because I don't have any grid template rows or columns defined. So it's the children are now defining the size of the cells, and it's shrinking and fitting that, and it's centering that entire thing within that space. And this is place content, so that is the shorthand for a justify content of center and an align content of center. So either one works the same way there. But now if you had just one item by itself, whether you use the content or the items, it's going to work exactly the same way. But as soon as you have multiple elements, if you do want to center things, first of all, I find this a little bit easier with grid than with Flexbox once again, with multiple items being centered. And you'd probably want to use the content version to center if you do have multiple things. Because if not, your grid still takes up all the space and you're just centering them within their own cells. Whereas now we're actually centering the entire grid within the available space. And there's one last thing to talk about now, which is what if you don't want to use positioning or grid or Flexbox? How can we center something? And that's actually become possible. You might want to check browser support for this part of it though. And we're going to get rid of that second div because we won't need it for now. We're going to go back to having a single thing and just worry about centering one singular element. And so if we have one thing and we want to center it, what we can actually do on that on the outer box, let's get rid of the selector, we don't need any of those. On this outer box is I can do, and there's a trick to remembering this, an align content of center, and watch this, it's going to center vertically. This is relatively well supported, but the newer one that has not as good browser support, though again, check your browser support tables or just experiment and do some testing with it, because it's kind of cutting edge as I'm recording this, but I can do a justify items of center and it will center the other way as well. And this is on a regular block level element. I can now center the children. And just in case you're wondering what would happen if we have multiple children, then we would get this type of behavior similar to what we actually had with the grid before. So this is kind of neat. The hard thing with it is remembering which ones to use. And just because anytime you're using Flexbox, most of the time with Flexbox, we use an align items and a justify content. So in this case, you just flip it upside down. Go, I'm going to use the ones that I don't normally use, and then it's going to give me what I want. And that's with just regular block parent, it will, or we can now center things. And this was being added to the spec just because they're like, oh, we can do this now. It shouldn't actually cause any problems because they don't like changing the way things worked previously, because then you could potentially break sites. But align content, justify items were things that would be used on block level elements. So adding it in as a new functionality shouldn't cause any issues. So these are now part of the spec and will start becoming a thing. So while we've always relied on other things to center stuff, soon we won't have to rely on anything at all. So yeah, I hope you really enjoyed this and learned a few things along the way about how some of the different features of CSS work. When it comes to choosing which one to use, it really does depend on the situation. If I just need to center stuff, I guess this would be where I'd want to go. Because of browser support, I tend to use grid. If I have decorative things and I need position absolute, then I will use the position absolute when I looked at. And if I am already in a Flex context because of whatever reason, that's when I'll use the Flex version. But if I'm deciding between Flexbox or Grid and I'm not really sure, in those situations I'll probably go with Grid just because I can do it with less lines. And if I have multiple items, it gets a little bit easier to do as well. So I really hope you enjoyed this video, learned a couple of things along the way, and now you can show off to your friends about all the different ways that you can center something with CSS if ever they give you one of those memes complaining about how hard it actually is. And with that, of course, until next time, don't forget to make your corner of the internet a little bit more awesome.